So the independence of critical federal agencies like the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, that independence is under attack. By whom? Of course, convicted felon Donald Trump. For example, he just summarily fired former FTC Commissioner Alvaro Bedoya, the same day that he also summarily fired Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter from the FTC. Now, both of them sued, and Slaughter's case has made it all the way to the Supreme Court. But Alvaro Bedoya is here to explain what happened in that situation involving the FTC. He's also here to explain why we should be paying attention very closely to what's happening with the potential merger of Warner Brothers with Netflix or Warner Brothers with Paramount Media, why we should care about these huge monopolies being created where we as consumers are trying to make sure that there's got to be somebody protecting us at the same time when Donald Trump wants to dismantle the CFPB, for example. Take a listen. Joining me now is a former commissioner of the FTC, the Federal Trade Commissioner, Alvaro Bedoya. Alvaro, it's good to see you. So, wow, a lot of things to cover, but first and foremost, I wanted to kind of get through some of the prior litigation that you were involved with the Trump administration, which, by the way, seems to kind of be the thing du jour. I think everybody in some capacity is going to have something.
You're not suing them, Katie. Why are you suing them? You should sue them. Yeah.
Oh, I am also a part of Democracy Defenders Fund. We have more than 200 lawsuits dealing with the Trump administration, but you and your colleague at the FTC, Rebecca Slaughter, were both summarily, and I want to emphasize that adverb, summarily terminated by the Trump administration via email, which is like a breakup via Post-it at this rate, saying that your, quote, continued service on the FTC is inconsistent with my administration's priorities, end quote. Which on its face is illegal, invalid. And we've now seen Rebecca Slaughter's litigation go as far as the Supreme Court of the United States. They just had oral arguments a few weeks ago on her case. Now, you were a part of it, and then you are no longer a part of that litigation because you left the FTC. You were fired, but then you eventually resigned, correct?
Yes. So basically, Commissioner Slaughter and I took the position that we were still commissioners because the letter of the law says we could only be fired for inefficiency, malfeasance, and neglect. And the email went out of its way to not allege any of those things. And the Supreme Court said 9-0 about 90 years ago that law was good law. And so it was our...
In that case, I'm sorry to interrupt, that case is Humphrey's executor, because a lot of people hear that case and they are like, who's Humphrey and why do we care about his will? But that really wasn't the issue. It's just called Humphrey's
because he
executor.
Passed away after filing the lawsuit, and so his executor continued it. And so he won that 9-0, and or his estate won that 9-0. And so it was our position, we're still commissioners. And part of being a commissioner is that you cannot get outside money. $0 and 0 cents.
Makes sense because it's an independent. It's an independent agency. You shouldn't be influenced or persuaded in some type of untoward way, right? So they're worried.
And
about
so
that.
my wife and I, looked at our savings and said we can ride this thing out for 3 months, and then at the end of that, we're going to have to get another job, Alvaro. And so that's what happened. So I'm no longer part of the lawsuit. That's right.
Well, Alvaro, I just want to kind of footnote what you just said right now, because I find it to be an atrocity. And I think Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson shared my sentiment about that when she said during the oral arguments before SCOTUS on Commissioner Slaughter's case, she said, quote, so having a president come in and fire all the scientists and the doctors and the economists and the PhDs and replacing them with loyalists and people who don't know anything is actually not in the best interest of the citizens of the United States, end quote. I mean, she and obviously Justices Kagan, Sotomayor having grave concerns about overturning Humphrey's executor and basically allowing the executive branch headed up by who I call convicted felon Donald Trump supersede the brilliance of people like you and Commissioner Slaughter and others that otherwise should be standing in independent capacities, appointed for long terms, and to be able to call balls and strikes as you see them, regardless of who the president is.
And look, I would add a layer on top to everything you just said, which I think is right, which is it doesn't even matter if the people in place are smart or not. Because what Trump demands is full loyalty. And either the people in office obey him and they stay, or they don't and they're out. And so this is where we've come to. And so to give a very concrete example, last year we sued Amazon because it in some of the earlier years of Prime, extremely easy to accidentally subscribe to Prime and extremely hard to unsubscribe, such that you would click a button that said unsubscribe from Prime, and that was the first of a 14-click, it was like 3 or 4 page, 14 option journey that the company itself called the Iliad. So we sued Amazon. We went out of our way to sue 3 executives because we had reason to think, and we allege this in the complaint, that they knew there was a problem. Their own employees said, please fix this problem. And the executive said, no, we're not going to fix the problem. And so we sued the executives and Amazon. Then what happens? Jeff Bezos cuts $1 million check for the inauguration. He cuts a sweetheart deal through Amazon for a documentary featuring the First Lady. The New York Post says that it's going to land $25 million in the First Lady's pockets. An unspecified sum is given to license The Apprentice, and then an unspecified sum is given for that Golden Ballroom project in the now demolished site of the East Wing. And suddenly, this new FTC settles it such that none of the executives have to pay a dime in fines. They are not fired. They're not demoted. They're not subject to any additional monitoring. They have the equivalent of like an Amazon gift card to do whatever the hell they want. And so in this new environment where the only thing that matters is loyalty, this is the stuff that happens. It's that companies who have taken advantage of people get off scot-free.
Putting aside the grotesque corruption and grift, which we know is the trademark kind of hallmark of this administration, my part of my reason I'm so upset about what happened with you, though, is you had the spirit and the willingness to fight, but this is kind of how Trump operates, right? In this administration, they want to beat you into submission in a way where they either outspend you on litigation, or they threaten you, or they try to oppress you into submission. And so you did the very pragmatic calculus, which is, I have a family and I am willing to fight back. And P.S., the shade that you and Commissioner Slaughter did, which I thought was freaking amazing, was posting on the FTC website in the public comments portal and making sure that you were utilizing your First Amendment right to be able to express your concerns and disagreements with what the FTC was doing after you were illegally fired. I mean, this is kind of how they roll, right? This is how they operate, which is unethical and it's wrong. And yet again, this is the way that they kind of get you into submission, so you throw up the white flag.
Yes. So I learned something I don't know if hard way, the long way, let's just say, through this process, which is when you go to law school, what doesn't click usually is the ex post nature of the law. The fact that the law fixes things long after the fact, right? If you are suing someone, that's going to take months. That could take years. So we were fired, or they tried to fire us on March 18th, 2025. Yes.
5. Yeah.
The Supreme Court will probably decide this at some point in late spring 2026. Could be as late as June 2026. And because I said, no, I have to resign in order to get a job to take care of my family, I got dinged out of the lawsuit. And how bananas is that? That had I had the resources to just stay without any income, I'd still be a part of this lawsuit. These are the things. There's the spirit of the law, and there is the actual, crunchy, gears turning on the road operation of the law, and the latter is very different from what it looks like, in that nice statue with the blind, lady holding the scales.
Yeah. Well, no, and I'm sorry that we kind of had to revisit that kind of salt in the wound moment with you, but I want our viewers to understand, though, that there is the very real impact of this litigation. I had just had a conversation with one of my best friends, Joyce Vance, about Judge Hannah Dugan and the outcome of her verdict from her case, and how that will materially impact her professional career moving forward, not just as a judge, but as a lawyer, right? And I think about how there are very real impacts when it comes to fighting, for justice and defending democracy. And that is why when we have people like you and Commissioner Slaughter and others that are willing to step into the breach, that's why I want to make sure we have these important conversations, which leads me to, I think, our next important conversation, which is, look, as your role as a commissioner at the FTC, one of the things that you would be eyeballing would be this potential merger where Warner Brothers has been wooed I would say wooed. I called it the Bachelor version of this.
The
And that
finals.
Warner Brothers was
Yes.
being wooed by
Yes.
Paramount, Skydance, as well as Netflix. And in the end, as of maybe yesterday, Netflix got the rose. Netflix got the rose, but doesn't mean that Netflix got the final
Right.
rose, because Paramount came back to the table and said, oh, but wait, there's more. You get the Ginsu knives. Larry Ellison, who's like one of Donald Trump's besties, said,
Right.
I am going to assuage any concerns that the board
Yeah.
of directors has at Warner Brothers, which was, wait, time out. Like Netflix
Right.
is coming to the table with all this money and they're kind of a sure bet. And Paramount, not so much, but now Paramount's like, I may be able to deal with your fears.
Yeah. And look, so there's the bidding wars are occurring at a couple different levels. There's the public bidding war, which is, okay, Netflix's offer was effectively $27 a share, and it was a cash and stock offer, which some people like more than the Paramount offer, which was all cash, but was based off of this kind of weird Ellison family trust. And, so they were coming in higher. They were like above $100 billion in valuation. The Netflix was like 73 billion on one measure, 83 billion all in. And so Larry, Father Ellison, comes in and says, no, I'm going to backstop this with $40 billion cash. By the way, the rest of the money is going to come from the sovereign wealth funds of Abu Dhabi, Qatar, and the, quote, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is a super normal thing to have, CNN and HBO, the home of John Oliver, to be controlled by these Middle Eastern monarchies. I mean, I don't even know.
I'm not wrong, Alvaro. Like that's a really bizarre thing to have, right? In terms of equity ownership structure, right?
That's right. And we're also in a world. So what just happened last night needs to be underlined. So last night, CBS's 60 Minutes had a documentary ready to go it's a segment ready to go as part of 60 Minutes on this bizarre swamp gulag. Sorry, not the swamp gulag. That's a different one.
Oh no, that's alligator Alcatraz.
That's alligator Alcatraz on the bizarre, torture prison of Sikot in El Salvador. And this is the place that looks like a scene out of Andor, of this prison colony planet where everyone's got their head shaved, everyone's wearing the same thing. Literally, when you walk into this prison, the guards tell you, you are never going to leave. This is where you will die. This is what people are told. So CBS does this expose, and last minute, it sounds like it was the doing of Bari Weiss, this network-wide censor. I mean, literally, her job is censor. That's the definition of censor. That's what she does. Says, no, we're not going to run it this week. So already, we are in a world where the Ellison family, which currently owns CBS News, which includes 60 Minutes, CBS and CBS News 60 Minutes, is already doing this shit. And you're telling me you want them to also own CNN and also own one of the sharpest critics of this administration in the form of John Oliver, and now have as part owners of that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, MBS, like literally the Crown Prince, the guy who saw
Jamal Khashoggi,
who had, and this is American intelligence, found that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in, I believe, the Turkish embassy of Saudi Arabia in Istanbul. That guy's sovereign wealth fund will partly control CBS, not CBS, because the Ellisons own that, but CNN and HBO. It is completely bananas.
What about the cutter roll? I love too. The cutter jet, right. I'm going to park it outside of my presidential library, even though the guy doesn't open a book, but I'm going to park a freaking jet outside of my library. That too. They would have their fingers all in this mix too.
There's a very funny Qatari element here because there was an episode, and I think it was Ryan Grimm at Breaking Points has done some reporting on this, where apparently the Qataris, Jared Kushner went to the Qataris after he left, or like right in the twilight of his days, and said, hey, do you want to invest in this fund? And the Qataris said, well, no, that doesn't make any sense. Why would we do that? And after that, I'm trying to forget, there was something terrible that happened for the Qataris right after it. And after that, the Qataris said, look, fine, like you want us to bribe you, we will bribe you. And that's where the jet comes from. And so these are the folks who are going to be part owners in the Paramount offer of CNN, HBO Max, etc.
So before we get to even more of the perils of the Paramount deal, the Paramount perils, I guess is what you and I could call it. Frankly, we could do like 40 freaking episodes about just that. Let's talk about this Netflix deal because I think it's really important. So Netflix's merger would come, again, it'd be fully backed by this public company, right? So it wouldn't really need any of this financing deal that you'd get with this Paramount thing. Netflix would get HBO streaming networks. Netflix is already the world's biggest streaming subscription service and the largest producer of new content in the state of California, which we'll get into in a minute. Netflix will add HBO's 128 million subscribers already to its 300 million subscriber base. I mean, wouldn't we normally expect to see the FTC look at, let's just stick on the Warner Brothers Netflix reputation, right, for a second. Let's stay with that. Wouldn't you expect the FTC to be like, whoa, time out. Right. Even though you're not going to be buying CNN, for example, and all this other stuff, there is the very real possibility for the regular American that this could outprice them in significant ways on the subscription streaming side, right?
Yes. And so what you typically see from antitrust enforcers, and this one probably will go to the Department of Justice rather than FTC, but we're all basically doing the same job in different sectors.
Sure.
And so what you would see here is this is a pretty straightforward merger to monopoly. And what that means is you've got a scenario where this merger will result in someone having an overwhelming market power within a particular market, which is streaming. And already you don't need to be an economist or an antitrust lawyer to know that this situation's messed up. You just need to look at the price increases of Netflix, where a decade ago, a streaming no ad subscription was $7.99 and now it is $17.99. And of that $10 increase, maybe a buck or two can be attributed to inflation. This is not how a company who is scrambling over itself to try to compete for your business, acts. They would be keeping their prices low. They would be trying to compete on the basis of price. Instead, they're just moving up like this. And what this would do is take its nearest competitor off of the table. So the nearest price point to that $17.99 streaming no ad subscription is an HBO Max streaming no ad subscription for like $18.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
So it would take it off the table. And, what do you think is going to happen if fewer companies are competing for your business? The prices are going to go up. That seems extremely clear here. And look, there's all these dynamics with labor and theaters, but on its face, the biggest thing is there will be fewer competitors for your streaming dollar. And what that will mean is you'll get that email you're now used to getting every year and a half from Netflix saying, congratulations, we're bringing you more for more of your dollars, and we're increasing prices.
And so that's the kind of, in a nutshell, also the Warner Brothers Netflix, I call it the permutation, right? And then you've just touched upon the Paramount perils of maybe Warner Brothers dealing with Paramount. I mean, we saw, and you just mentioned it, which was, the Bari Weiss component of this, that Skydance Paramount deal, that was an $8 billion merger, right? That only came to pass when the condition precedent happened, which was the following: that they had to pay Donald Trump in his defamation, or really, it was really consumer fraud lawsuit, which was a whole other stupidity in and of itself. But for that 60 Minutes episode that Trump claimed was, falsely and intentionally edited in a way to favor Kamala Harris, blah, blah, blah. Millions and millions of dollars later, the merger happens, one, and two, you get Bari Weiss, and three, you get an ombudsman who gets installed to oversee DEI and make sure it pretty much doesn't happen at CBS. Could we see the same kind of thing happen even in a Netflix deal or in a Paramount deal?
Yes. And this is why I say there's a couple different bidding wars. There's the first bidding war of how much are you going to give to Warner Brothers Discovery? The second bidding war is what are you going to give to Donald Trump? What's in it for me? And so already David Ellison, Larry Ellison's son, who runs Paramount Skydance, has very publicly said, hey, we are buying CNN, because right now Netflix isn't buying CNN. So he's saying we are buying CNN. And let me tell you, there's going to be a top to bottom restructuring and programming, right? A couple days after that, the president comes out and says, I think whatever happens with this deal, CNN needs to be sold because the people running, and I'm paraphrasing here, the people running CNN are crooks and they don't know what they're doing. It needs to be completely restructured. And so what does that translate into? That translates into Netflix. I don't know what you're doing with CNN, but I want some changes, right? Maybe you're not buying it. Maybe Warner Brothers needs to do something else to it. But there is a second bidding war for who will censor things the way Donald Trump wants them to be censored and changed. And flashback, this is exactly what happened with Jimmy Kimmel. I think a lot of people hear the words antitrust, hear the words merger, and they just fall asleep because they're like, I don't know what the hell that is.
Yeah, anti-monopoly.
Anti-monopoly. I don't know.
Yeah.
What every single one of these mergers is a chance for Donald Trump to get his little hooks into these networks and the people on these networks and their ability to make fun of him, to criticize him, and all of that. What happened with Jimmy Kimmel is that there was a acquisition of two broadcasters where one was going to acquire too many that was going to put it over the statutory limit or the regulatory limit. And Brendan Carr, the Trump's FCC chair, says we can do this the easy way or the hard way, and very clearly signaled he wanted Jimmy Kimmel off the air, and that's how he got off the air. And so we're going to see a second bidding war where Netflix and Paramount are each going to trip over each other to say not to Warner Brothers Discovery, but to the president, here's how we're going to reshape this new conglomerate's coverage, programming to better help you. And that will not be as public. We will just find out about that when the ink is dry on the page, I think.
Which kind of gets us full circle, ironically, which was not my intention, but I guess look how things happen, to the idea of the independence of these federal agencies, right?
Yeah,
because
that's right.
The FCC, for example, headed up by Brendan Carr, we know that he is, or I'll use this phrase and not attribute it to you, but you probably won't disagree with me. I mean, he's just a lackey, right? He's one of several lackeys. Yeah. And then it also gets to the independence of one of the most critical federal agencies, which is the Department of Justice, where you would normally see an independent DOJ saying, whoa, time out.
Right.
Time out.
Precisely.
None of this helps Americans.
Yep.
We don't allow this. You can't do this. This isn't kosher. We're not going to allow this to happen. But when you have a law lackey like Pamela Joe Bondi running the DOJ, who's pretty much just personal counsel for Trump, it ends up just being one huge federal grift for Donald Trump. And then, of course, the omnipresent, ubiquitous Jared Kushner, whose role in and of itself merits some level of scrutiny. I mean, Alvaro, How do we continue to fight against this trend when the watchdogs like you and Commissioner Slaughter at the FTC and others, when they're just loyalists that are installed and the people that are supposed to be the watchdogs are being displaced?
So look, I actually think there's an answer here that too few people are talking about, which is that so many of the law enforcement dollars are tied up in the federal government. And what that means is that it just swings wildly from one side to the other in between administrations. Now, what I would say is the way it swung the last administration with Chair Lena Khan, with Assistant Attorney General Jonathan Cantor, was less about left to right and much more about, the bottom versus the top versus regular people, regular small business owners getting some justice vis-a-vis the oligarchs and billionaires. But what I would say is we need to start thinking about how to empower the 50 state attorneys general, plus the District of Columbia. Every single state has an attorney general who could block any one of these mergers. And
like the California Attorney General, Rob Bonta.
Rob Bonta, exactly. And what happens is, with the exception of a Rob Bonta in California or Letitia James in New York, they lack the resources and staffing to actually do that kind of work. And so if we manage to figure out a way to get some of the dollars that are currently flowing to these highly centralized federal enforcers into a much more diversified set of state enforcers, you would frankly have a much steadier ship when it came to protecting the American public, because there wouldn't be these wild swings in different directions. I don't know if we're ever going to go back to a world of independent agencies. I sincerely don't. The Supreme Court's going to issue their ruling, and we'll find out what they say. And unless the next president decides to change the nature of the Supreme Court, even then, it would probably take 5 or 10 years for this kind of ruling to change. So we're looking at like 15, 20 years before we get independent agencies again, and maybe I shouldn't predict, but that's what a lot of people think is going to happen. And so I think we need to have plan Bs for this kind of scenario.
Well, I don't know if your ears are burning, but I was talking about you with AG Rob Bonta specifically about the fact that he is literally like not even like an hour ago.
What did he say?
How he's empowered as a California AG.
That's right.
State legislators who were giving him this, and a governor, right, who gives him this power to be able to step into the breach when the federal government refuses to do this, to fight against monopolies and and to be antitrust. Phil Weiser, another AG, for example, in Colorado. And why I'm a big proponent, especially here on this channel, about us focusing as voters on state and local races, because there's a lot of, I think, unchecked and maybe also undervalued and underestimated power that exists on that level that we're just not appreciating that we could have. Quickly before I let you go, because I know I've overstayed my welcome time-wise with you, but this has been such a great conversation. Will you let the viewers know about this amazing pod that you have, the Fair Fight Pod with Max Miller? I am a personal fan of Car Talk from NPR, and I know you guys are like, we're the click and clack guys.
Click and clack are like, we could try. So basically, in next year, 2026, we're launching a new show. So folks will remember Car Talk. You had a problem with your car, you'd call Click and Clack, the Tappert brothers, and they would razz you a little bit, they'd have fun, and they'd give you advice. And Max and I, who's a former Assistant Attorney General of Iowa, realized we don't have something like that for the economy. And so we're rolling out a program where people can call in with their problems. You can send us a voice note at ask@thefairfightpod.com. And we'll answer them with the best experts about it. So, for example, we have labor lawyer Jennifer Abruzzo, former head of the general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board, on this in one of our first episodes next year, talking about workplace surveillance. So, the insane warehouse tracking of people who work in warehouses, the way call center workers have their calls listened to by AI and judged by AI, and they're promoted or fired based on AI evaluations of their calls. Iris scanning, fingerprint scanning, GPS tracking when you're working for someone. Is all that stuff legal? We're going to be answering those kinds of questions. Best place to find out about it, just look at the Fair Fight Pod with Alvaro and Max on X. And you can also go to thefairfightpod.com, sign up, and you'll get updates when we launch in a couple weeks.
Well, I'm super excited. Again, big fan of Car Talk, and I love this format, and I love kind of the crew and the team that you've put together. I think it's invaluable. And, I'm just really grateful for you to take the time to explain what can sometimes appear to be intimidating topics, right? I mean, these are very kind of hard things to digest, and for you to take the time to break it down and make it make sense, not only as you will do on your pod with Max, but also the way you've done so today for me. So, former FTC Commissioner Alvaro Bedoya, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie.
Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.